I'm Tato Cat. Welcome to my channel. Today we are playing Asphyxia. Previously, after our old friend told us off, we realized that our current friend is kind of nice to us, and we're kind of seeing Lillian in a different light as we watched her and DeQuincy do their thing. And now there's a ghost dog in our bed, and we're just kind of figuring out where that leads. Alright, let's continue. Percy and Roberta had already fallen asleep, though Georgia had not. The young lady, Byron, was in fact not present in the bedroom at all. Samantha wondered briefly where Georgia had gone, but ultimately decided that she didn't really care. What Georgia Byron did was none of her business. Samantha fingered a lock of her hair. Earlier that day, Lillian had said that it was beautiful. It was the first time Lillian had complimented her in months. Maybe Samantha thought if she hadn't cut off her hair, Lillian would still like her. Maybe if she was still beautiful, she would have a chance. But Samantha wasn't beautiful anymore. If she had ever been to begin with, she never felt further from it. She must have lived in London for too long. There were precious few beautiful things there. In London, the delicate flowers and abundant green hills of the countryside were eclipsed by grey concrete and scabby pigeons, pecking at crusts on the pavement. If you wanted to see flowers in London, the best place to go was to a florist, and Lily had never liked such places. She disliked the way the most visually pleasing parts of nature were selected and stuffed into black plastic flower pots, sold to people who wanted something to help spruce up their kitchen tables. Lillian said she found the ostentatious bouquets on display in shop windows too removed from reality to be moving. Lillian was a precise, meticulous person herself, but she hated order being imposed upon the natural world around her. In that sense, she might have been something of a hypocrite, but Samantha loved her regardless. Would she ever stop loving her? Lillian. Samantha murmured her erstwhile friend's name under her breath, arms around her middle. Samantha longed for Lillian's friendship, but her own sensibilities were too macabre to allow for any careless optimism, and she very much doubted that would happen. Lillian was a woman of strong convictions, and she didn't back down when she made up her mind. Samantha knew the sensible thing to do would be to stop thinking of Lillian, but she couldn't. She had never been one for self-restraint, and she was even less capable of it when Lillian was involved. What should she do? She didn't know, but she did know, for a fact, staring up at the ceiling would not offer her any answers. Samantha couldn't sleep. Her head was packed full with Lillian Wordsworth. To such an extent she feared her skull might splinter. She couldn't sleep. Then she had little purpose, lying in bed tormenting herself. She was just making herself miserable. She needed to do something else, anything else. Oh, this is a cute little nighty thing. Samantha got to her feet, animated by a restless energy. She was wearing her favorite nightdress, one she had found in the corner of a charity shop. Lillian had always said that this nightgown made her look like a ghost from a gothic novel, but she was no longer there to make such an observation. Samantha crept across the room, treading carefully so as to not awake her roommates. Finally, she made her way to the door and opened it. Prizing it open inch by inch, her breath bated the whole while. When she had opened the door far enough and was about to slip through the gap she had made, she was suddenly halted by a voice. "Hey, Sam, is that you?" "I assume it's DeQuincy." Samantha blinked alarmed and peered out into the hallway. It was difficult to see in the dark, and Samantha didn't eat nearly enough carrots to make up for it, but still, she recognized that voice. It was DeQuincy. Yay, I was right. Her back tense, Samantha peered into the dark and muttered, "What are you doing out here?" What is she wearing? Just why? Is all I can say. And of course, bows. I couldn't sleep, just like you. I suppose that makes sense. But what do you want with me? Samantha tried to keep her voice steady, but she stammered all the same. De Quincey was the very last person she wanted to run into before setting off on her stroll. Why was she so unlucky? Because I am controlling you and I choose what happens. Ish. Hey, don't look at me like that. I'm not a monster. I want to have a word with you. Can I? Well... Samantha knew that when De Quincey said a word, she didn't truly mean that. Nobody ever did. Language was just a game to most people, something as vague and unfixed as smoke in the air. In actuality, De Quincey wanted to have a talk, something that would require a good deal more time, energy, and emotion than a single word ever could. This is important. I wanted to speak to you for the last 2 months, but you've been avoiding me, so I never got the chance. To tell the truth, it kinda hurts. I thought we were friends. I thought we were friends too, but now... Samantha shook her head. I don't know. Then let's talk about it. We can't resolve anything if we don't talk. Well... Besides, it's late, and neither of us can sleep. Might as well... Don't you think? There's nothing else to do around here, unless you fancy climbing trees in the dark. De Quincey's proposition was a sensible one, but Samantha wasn't sure if she was up to such a trying task. The prospect of a talk had never sounded more ominous. And? De Quincey grinned. I have cigarettes. Tempted now? I didn't know that was a tempting thing for our precious Samantha. Samantha blushed. As much as she hated to admit her weakness, she had been craving nicotine lately. Smoking was relaxing. Oh, Samantha's a smoker. And a drinker. Didn't expect that. It helped soothe the rapid beating of her heart and made everything feel far less stressful. She had managed to stress herself immensely this past hour with all the circular thoughts about Lillian. De Quincey grinned, her face a disembodied mask of bobbing in the dark. Good, I knew you'd agree. Let's get out of here. Oh, this is pretty. Samantha tried to light up her cigarette, but she fumbled with it. Her fingers were so frozen she could hardly even hold the lighter. Her nightgown hadn't been made with winter months in mind. The fabric was so thin, it almost seemed to invite the cold air to impress its invisible icy fingers against the hollows of her skin. Foolishly, Samantha had forgotten her shoes before stepping outside. Her feet were quite bare, exposed to the wind. She shifted, toes curling from cold, grinding against the hard earth and heather underfoot. It almost felt like her toes were calcifying. Perhaps, in a matter of minutes, they would become just as hard as those funny fossils you could find scattered throughout the English countryside, buried under hedgerows and farmers' fields. What were they called again? Devil's toenails? Samantha had liked searching for them when she was younger, scrambling around in the dirt with her muddied fingertips like a little dog. She amassed quite the collection of them at one point, lined up neatly on her bedroom windowsill. Samantha didn't know what had happened to them now. She hadn't been back home in years. Her mother had probably thrown them away. Her mother had never cared overly much about her possessions. De Quincey watched as Samantha struggled with her lighter and smiled. You need a hand with that? It's alright. I should be able to do at least this much. Samantha's fingers, however, were just as stubborn as Samantha was, and they refused to cooperate. Damn. Samantha swore under her breath as the lighter slipped from between her fingers and hit the ground. De Quincey, eager to please, bent down and grasped it in the palm of her hand. Here, let me try. I wouldn't want you to burn down the entire Lake District. Samantha blushed. All the blood in her body migrated to her cheeks, so the tips of her fingers felt even colder. Was it just her imagination? Or had they even started to turn blue? With an expert motion well practiced over the years, De Quincey lit the end of Samantha's cigarette. A small flame bloomed in the darkness, like unfurling petals of a rare exotic flower. Samantha took the cigarette and inhaled deeply. Thankfully, she didn't choke. She'd done this one too many times to make such an amateur mistake. At least, that was one thing she could be proud about. So, Samantha plucked the cigarette from between her lips with shaking fingers and exhaled. Her mouth pursed into a small O. "What do you want to talk to me about?" Just like her fingers, Samantha's voice shook, trembling with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite place. Maybe fear was one of them? Fear at having this conversation, which she put off for so very long. "Are you really asking? I thought it'd be obvious. I'm talking about what happened just after Christmas holidays, of course." Samantha winced. She should have known. This would be what De Quincey wanted to talk about. The past loved to torment Samantha, digging its claws into wounds which had barely begun to heal. Samantha didn't much want to, but still she remembered what happened. She remembered in a surprising amount of detail, in fact, given how intoxicated she had been at the time. Ooh, are we getting a flashback? There had been pain shooting through the small of her back as she had been pushed against the wall. Hands grabbed her waist hard enough to sting, and she had sobbed. She had squirmed trying to break free, but it was no use. De Quincey had been stronger than her, and Samantha had been drunk, and her body hadn't obeyed her even as she begged it to. De Quincey's mouth had tasted foul of cigarettes and alcohol. Her kisses made Samantha choke. For several moments, Samantha's body had seemed to shut down. She'd been unable to breathe, her chest heaving with tears she couldn't suppress, though she tried. It had been a few moments into the kiss when Samantha realized escape was impossible, as she'd been struck by the thought that she'd been kissing not another person, distinct from herself, but her own duplicate, an ice-cold reflection in the mirror. De Quincey was like Samantha, but with fewer inhibitions, far more comfortable in her unhealthy addictions than Samantha ever would be. The two were more similar than Samantha had thought, had ever wanted to think. They were both shameless, careless, and selfish. Wasn't that why Lillian had abandoned her after a several-year-long friendship? Lillian hated her. Samantha had made Lillian hate her, and it was all her fault. Everything was always her fault. Well, maybe we shouldn't have gone after De Quincey. I didn't think that's where that would go. Samantha shivered at the memory, her head bent. She wanted to wrap her arms around herself, but one hand held her cigarette and she didn't want to drop it. Not on the grass or on herself. That seemed like a kind of stupid thing she would do. Her nightdress all of a sudden felt far too exposing, the material thin and flimsy. Try as she might, she couldn't stop shaking. "Hey, Sam!" De Quincey looked her over, an unusually penitent expression playing across her face. "I really am sorry I did that. It was pretty shitty of me." De Quincey frowned, bringing her cigarette to her own lips. She inhaled for a long time, her eyes closed, lashes matted together. When she drew the cigarette away, she exhaled. A thick plume of smoke formed around her head like a halo. "I don't remember everything that happened, though. Not exactly. I was pretty out of it at the time. That's probably why I did it in the first place. I imagine you enjoyed it more than you did kissing Simon, though, huh?" Samantha's face turned bright red, despite the cold. "You know about Simon? Even so, De Quincey, it's still wrong." "Of course, you told me about him quite a lot, I might add." "Oh, God." Samantha did not doubt that De Quincey's words were true. How else would she have learned about Simon if not from her own treacherous mouth? But she couldn't remember confiding thus in De Quincey. Entrusting De Quincey with the secret was equivalent to self-sabotage, given her well-documented love for spreading gossip. Samantha really must have been drunk if she told DeQuincy all that. Groaning, Samantha pressed her free hand against her head, driving the heel of her palm against her brow. Maybe she thought if she pressed hard enough she could push her eyeballs back into their sockets until they fell with a rattle into the recesses of her skull. That way, she wouldn't have to look at DeQuincy's face. She wouldn't have to be reminded either of what DeQuincy had done to her. Her kisses had burned Samantha's lips just like rubbing alcohol against exposed flesh. Now, however, it was Samantha's eyes that stung, as she applied an even stronger pressure to them to rival that of the deepest depths of the ocean. Today had been an unpleasant day all around, of dredging up old memories and ghosts that had long since been laid to rest. Perhaps DeQuincy was some sort of grave robber, but not in the physical sense, rather in an emotional one. Samantha remembered Simon Fricker, though she wished she didn't. Simon Fricker was the brother of Roberta's beau, Edmund, and it had been Roberta who had first introduced them. According to Roberta, Simon was nice, and Samantha needed somebody in her life who could be nice to her. She was never, to borrow Roberta's words, nice to herself after all. Roberta had been right in that regard. Simon had been nice. His niceness, however, had belied no deeper qualities, no political opinions, no complex thoughts. His head was so empty, it might as well have been a Halloween pumpkin scooped of all its flesh and seeds. Simon's hands had been so clumsy they crushed hers when they tried to link them together, and when they went out for coffee he had spilt Samantha's latte, not her drink of choice, over her lap. Even now Samantha wondered why she allowed Roberta to set them up. Samantha had no real interest in boys, and she certainly had no interest in boyfriends. It could not be denied, however, that she had been a little curious. Teen magazines said it was normal for young teenage girls to start dating and experimenting, dipping a toe into the adult world of love and commitment and marriage. Maybe that was why Samantha had agreed. She just wanted to know what it was like. Maybe even she could have been normal too, by the stipulations of those magazines. Being with Simon, alas, hadn't felt normal at all. It had been stilted and embarrassing and awkward. Simon's hands might have been clumsy when he held hers, but they had been utterly inept the first and last time they had slept together. Simon had tried to be gentle with her. Samantha knew that. He tried because he liked her. He maybe even loved her a little bit. Samantha had not, however, loved him. She tried to like him because he seemed kind, and she probably needed somebody like him in her life. She had hoped in trying to like him, she really would grow to like him. That seemed like the right thing to do. After agreeing to go on so many dates with him, the first becoming a second, then third, then a fourth, she had wanted to let him down, but for all her goodly intentions, it hadn't worked. Try though she had, Samantha had been unable to enjoy his company. Samantha had slept with Simon not out of tenderness, but out of desperation. She had hoped this would finally make her fall in love with him, but instead, it made her despise him. Sex was supposed to be something special, or so Samantha had heard, but sex with Simon had been just as depressing as the rest of her passionless, pointless relationship. After that, Samantha stopped answering Simon's texts. She hadn't answered her phone. She had ignored him, as she always did when faced with problems. For to her, that was all Simon had been, a problem. That had been the end of their short-lived relationship. It was all over now, and Samantha was glad for it, though admittedly she did feel somewhat guilty about the whole affair. Yeah, you kind of led him along, Chicky. I feel like, after the second date, because the first date, you never know how well it'll go because you're all nervous. But like the second date, doesn't go well, just end it. If you don't like them then, you probably won't like them later. I don't see what this has to do with Simon. He has nothing to do with anything. You told me you didn't feel anything when you slept with him, so I thought. DeQuincy shrugged. maybe you'd feel something if you kissed me. I don't know. Seemed like a good idea at the time. In other words, you don't like boys. You might like girls. Is that where she was going with that? And I thought cutting my hair last night seemed like a good idea, and look where that got me. Well, you've got a point there. So, does my hair really look that bad? As a confessional writer who strives to always tell the unvarnished truth, I must be honest with you. It really does look bad. I knew it. Samantha sighed. If even De Quincey, who dyed her hair so often it could range through all the colors of the rainbow in under 3 weeks, thought her hair looked bad, then it really must have been terrible. I still haven't forgiven you for that kiss though, you know. You shouldn't have done it. I know that now, but I didn't at the time. I was too drunk to really tell what I was doing. Not that that makes it any better, I guess. At least you admit to this. I know it isn't nice when other people force themselves on you like that. I've been on the receiving end a couple of times, so I should have realized. I guess I'm pretty thoughtless. That, for forgetful, maybe. Huh? Samantha's eyes widened in shock at this unexpected information. She wasn't sure how she should take it. She's not heard about this before. You have? Well, yeah, I guess. De Quincey smiled sheepishly. Let's just say, being homeless in London isn't a barrel of laughs, though it only lasted a few months. You were homeless? Uh-huh. De Quincey nodded. I can't pretend that it was an enjoyable experience, but it certainly was an experience. I don't know if I regret it entirely. If I'd never run away, I wouldn't have been able to come here. In the end, it all worked out. That's how I see my experiences. Like, even if they're bad or good, they're still experiences. Samantha looked at her feet, suddenly too awkward to meet De Quincey's eye. Do you want to tell me what happened? Well, I guess I could. I know so many secrets about you, perhaps I had to reciprocate. Seems only fair, considering. De Quincey pondered, taking another drag of her cigarette to pass the time. The two girls stood together underneath the sparkling stars, gray smoke swirling in the air in miasma. Samantha knew her nightgown was going to smell suspiciously of cigarette smoke after this moonlight tryst, but she couldn't bring herself to care about such minor details. It seemed unimportant. Lillian hadn't liked it when Samantha smoked, but why would Samantha worry about her? Lillian had already abandoned her. That's right, just move on. Their friendship being over, Samantha thought she might as well indulge in a few vices, which made her happy. She was already so miserable, she failed to see how she could feel even worse. Well? De Quincey spoke up at long last, a bashful smile flitting about her lips. It's just a sob story, I suppose. It's nothing too interesting. But if you want to hear it, I guess I can oblige you. De Quincey cleared her throat, then began. Confessions of an English opium eater. What an achievement that is. I was sick a lot as a child, so I was pretty isolated growing up. My mother didn't let me go outside all that much, so I spent most of my time indoors. I was homeschooled until I was 11, thanks to my poor health and my mother's obsessive desire to always keep an eye on me. I didn't like being stuck inside with her around the clock, with nothing to do save fractions. It was pretty tedious. My mother was this huge proponent of rote learning, and she tried to make me memorize strings of information at a time, without telling me why or what the purpose behind it was. It was so monotonous I couldn't really see the point in any of it. When I tried to tell my mother how I felt, however, she freaked out. She said she was sacrificing a lot to teach me, so I should be grateful for her guidance. I think she was something of a control freak. DeQuincy pulled a face. She still is. Eventually, however, my mother decided there were gaps in her general knowledge and she couldn't help me with. As such, she decided to reluctantly, I'm sure, send me to school. I know a lot of kids hate going to school, but I loved it. It was the first time I'd really been able to interact with others my own age, discounting my sister. I was good at my studies and my teachers praised me. Some of my classmates were jealous, but I stood my ground. I never let myself get bullied. It was a lot of fun. DeQuincy sighed. Well, it lasted. My mother was worried, you see, that I was becoming too complacent, I suppose. I don't know her exact reasoning, but after 2 years she decided my school wasn't cutting it, and she sent me somewhere else. I didn't like my new school very much. It was smaller than the first, and my teacher, Mr. Spencer, his name was, might have been the most boring man on the planet. He could even give my mother a run for her money. It was so boring, I couldn't stand it. I don't think I learned a single useful thing all the time I was there. Evidently, my mother agreed that the school wasn't good enough, so she decided to send me to another school. Yes, another. She hoped I'd be able to take my studies more seriously if I went somewhere stricter. She wanted me to go to Oxford and make something of myself. She still does, I think. At that point, however, I moved around too much and I was tired of switching schools, and it was hard for me to settle in. My grades had always been good, but that only made me feel more pressure to succeed. I disliked my old school for being too easy, but my new one was, by contrast, too stressful. It was awful, really. And to make it worse, I didn't have any friends. I tried to hack it as best I could, but my best wasn't good enough, I guess. One day, it became too much and I snapped. Yeah, I've done that. I didn't run away though. I ran away from school without any thought as to where I'd go or what I'd do. I ended up slumming around in London with hardly any money to my name. I might be gifted academically, but when it comes to common sense, I'm somewhat lacking. Abashed, DeQuincy smiled. It was rotten. My time spent in London, I was starving, and it was cold, and it was in the middle of November. I didn't know anybody there, and I didn't have anywhere to go, but I tried to stick it out as best I could. I didn't want to go back home. I was afraid of what my mother would say. Being homeless in London seemed at the time a more appealing prospect than living with her. Being homeless and cold was a more appealing prospect than living with her mother. Oh, her mom must be terrible. Samantha stared at DeQuincy in shock. She never imagined that any of her own classmates, attired as they were in their demure St. Mary uniform, could have endured something so horrible. It didn't seem possible. DeQuincy spoke about her past in a detached manner, as though she was relaying the plight of a friend, but these experiences must have left their mark upon her. Okay, we'll end this episode here. We will see what happens to Samantha and DeQuincy after finding out all this new info. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, and Potato Cat. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon.